In this talk, we're going to be discussing how architecture responds to climate. And although in previous talks we've talked a little bit about rain and we talked about wind, we're really going to be focusing in this talk on sun. How is it that the sun and the cycles of the sun and the seasonal changes of the sun, how do all of those things work with architecture to shape architecture and to optimize the performance of a building? There was a period of time when human beings all kind of understood how the natural cycles of the sun and the seasons worked on the globe. But honestly, now that we're more urbanized individuals and that we're not depending for our livelihood on growing crops, and the crops are dependent on the sun and the cycles and the season and the cold and the heat, I think we've gotten a little divorced from that aspect of nature. And I think there are very few people actually who think much about what is the cycle of the sun, how does it change in different seasons. And for architects, that's really important because it can make a big difference in the performance of the building, the energy consumption of the building. So at the beginning here, let's just walk through exactly how does the sun work. And in particular, we're going to be looking at how does the sun work in a climate like in Austin, which is 32 degrees north latitude. The sun is very, very different in different latitudes. And so we have to kind of choose a selection there. At the equator, it behaves in a very different way than it would in Minneapolis. In Austin, we're kind of between those two extremes. So let's think for a moment about climates like Austin, about 32 degrees north latitude, and how does the sun work there. So maybe in elementary school, some teacher told you, little Johnny, the sun rises in the east, and at noon it's straight above your head, and it sets in the west. And that's a very, very naive take on how the sun works. In fact, that's never the way the sun works anywhere except for a very short period of time at the equator. But in Austin, if we looked at the summer condition, the sun actually rises 28 degrees north of east, way north of east. 28 degrees north of east, and then as it moves through the sky, it peaks at 82 degrees above the horizon at noon on June 21st in the summertime. That's the highest it ever gets in the sky, never gets to 90 degrees. That only happens at the equator. And then it goes from 82 degrees above the horizon at noon to down to setting 28 degrees north of west. So on June 21st, the longest day of the year, there's that enormous cycle of the sun from 28 degrees north of east all the way through the sky, high up to 82 degrees above the horizon and setting at 28 degrees north of west. Now, in the wintertime on December 21st, very, very different cycle of the sun. It starts 28 degrees south of east at sunrise, and then it rises a very small arc through the sky, only gets up to 35 degrees above the horizon at noon. At noon on December 21st, the highest the sun gets is 35 degrees above the horizon, and then it sets 28 degrees south of west. So it makes that much smaller arc through the sky on December 21st. And that's, of course, why it's much colder with that small arc of the sun than it is in the summertime with that large arc of the sun. Now, that difference is actually very, very good for architects because it means different times of the year we can understand where the sun is to capture heat when we want it or to resist having heat gain from the sun when we don't want it. And because it's very different at different times of the year, we can adjust to that and use that to our advantage. Now, the components of how we describe the sun's path have two key words. One is we're interested in the altitude of the sun at any point, and we're interested in its azimuth, or that is what its relationship is to the cardinal points. So the altitude is how many degrees above the horizon, and the azimuth is how many degrees east, west, south, north, whatever, in relation to the cardinal points. And for many years, there were these elaborate charts that architects looked to figure out. You could look any day of the year, any season of the year, any time of the day. You could find out what was the altitude and the azimuth of the sun. And so you're trying to design your building and think about it in relationship to all that path of the sun any day of the year you're interested in. There was a lot of math involved in that, a lot of extrapolation. And of course, it was different for every latitude, so you had to factor that into it. Nowadays, of course, we have software that does all of that, super easy. You can put a building in there and you can turn it all around and figure out on September 21st at 10 o'clock, where's the sun? And they'll tell you exactly where that is. Or at 2 o'clock, where's the sun? They'll tell you exactly where it is. And you'll be able to see how it interacts with your building. But these days, that knowledge of how the sun moves through the sky and how your building is going to interact with it has a huge impact on the energy efficiency of the building and how it performs in general. Actually, just the pleasantness of being inside the building. So there are really three things, design-wise, that we use in reaction to that path of the sun. And I'm going to make some generalizations here for our general climate about these three aspects. It's not hard and fast, it's variable, but just as a kind of rule of thumb, we're going to look at how would you treat a building in this latitude in terms of optimizing that performance of the sun we just talked about. So the first of these issues is the massing of the building. And the massing of the building can have a huge impact on its energy performance. So in this climate, ideally the building is a rectangle with long faces north and south and short faces east and west. Long faces north and south, short faces east and west. And the reason for that is that we think about when the sun is low in the sky. In the wintertime, it's low in the sky in the south. And we'd actually like to get some of that heat gain coming in the building. So those faces of the building that are long to the south will get some beneficial heat gain in the wintertime. Where is the sun low in the sky in the summertime? Well, it's low in the sky all along the east side from 28 degrees north of east all the way through there all morning long. And then it's really there killer hot in the west all the way through the afternoon, and it's low in the sky there. So if we're looking at where it hits the walls of the building, those are the areas where we do not want any heat gain in the summertime, and where it's low in the sky in the summertime are the east and the west. In the middle of the day, it's on the top, so it doesn't affect the walls of the building so much. So we want that long south face so we can get some beneficial south light low in the sky in the wintertime, and then we want really short east and west faces because we do not want that heat gain from the sun low in the sky all through the morning in the summer and all through the afternoon in the summer. So in general, long faces north and south, short faces east and west, and the height about equal to the width. You don't want a real pancake building that might get too much heat gain from above, and you don't want too much wall to the building in this climate because that also can have some deleterious effects. So about the same height as width. That massing is a very good massing for this climate. Okay, a second issue we deal with is fenestration. It's F-E-N-E-S-T-R-A-T-I-O-N. That really means doors and windows. Where do we put the doors and windows? These are the vulnerable parts of the building. That's where you're going to get your most heat gain, is through the windows, not through the solid walls. So where we put those windows makes a big difference in heat gain. So where do we want those windows? The best place for the windows is on the south face. And the reason for that is because we can get that beneficial light and heat gain in the wintertime. And if we appropriately shade those windows, we can keep it out in the summertime. So because it's so different in the south, sometimes the sun is here, sometimes it's there, sometimes it's there at different seasons of the year, but we can use that variability in the south sky to be able to control it. And so on the south face, that's a good place for fenestration. Almost as good in this climate is the north face. The north face actually gets not very much heat gain. A little bit really early in the morning or really late in the afternoon in the summertime. But mostly the north face doesn't get a lot of heat gain. So that's a really good place for fenestration because in general, we're looking at avoiding heat gain. So, but it doesn't get either beneficial heat gain. So like that, the south side can get a little beneficial winter sun. The north side can't get that. So it's maybe a little less good than the south side, but still, fenestration on the north side is very good. Fenestration on the east side, not so good. Because if you have a window that's facing east and that summer sun is all through that eastern part of the sky, you're going to get some heat gain in the morning. And that's not a great thing in the summertime. So that's not so good. The killer, though, is fenestration on the west side. You absolutely do not want fenestration on the west side because that means that all afternoon in the summertime, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, you're getting that hot sun pouring in. And as different from the east side where it might be 80 degrees in the morning here, by the time that sun's over there in the west, it's 105 degrees. So it's 105 degrees outside and you're getting all that heat gain coming in. Terrible to have west-facing windows. So in terms of fenestration, best on the south, close to the best on the north, not so good on the east, horrible on the west. Again, kind of rules of thumb. So we have massing, fenestration. The third issue we deal with is solar shading. And that's where you can put something on the building that keeps the sun from getting into those windows. And the really beneficial solar shading is on the south side, where if you make horizontal solar shading on the south side, that means the sun can penetrate in the winter when it's low in the sky, but it's kept out in the summertime when it's high in the sky. So horizontal solar shading on the south side, fantastic, super efficient, allows you heat gain when you want it and keeps out that heat when you don't want it. On the east and west sides, it's a little harder to do solar shading. It can be beneficial. It needs to be vertical solar shading primarily because you're trying to keep that sun out as it moves across the east or west sky. And if you make a vertical sunshade, except for when the sun's directly perpendicular to it, it will cast a shadow on the window and it will be very helpful in terms of keeping out the heat gain. So again, rule of thumb, generally horizontal solar shading on the south side, vertical solar shading on the east and the west side. Okay, that's the general principles of how the sun moves through the sky. It's the three issues we look at, massing, fenestration, and solar shading in order to respond to that, and some general rules of thumb about how that should work. So let's look at some examples, and I think that'll be good in helping to explain exactly how this works in a real building. Now we're actually going to start here with our climate, but in the southern hemisphere. Australia, most of their cities, Sydney, Melbourne, Perth, Adelaide, Canberra, they're mostly around 30, 32 degrees, 32 degree latitude in the southern hemisphere. So that means that their thermal performance is very similar to ours at 32 degrees in the northern hemisphere. Now, there is one thing I should explain to you. Australia is upside down. So when I say north and south, it's just the opposite in Australia. So what the behavior of the south face for us is actually the behavior of the north face for them, and vice versa. So just to make it easier on you and not confuse you, I'm going to pretend that these buildings in Australia are in the northern hemisphere, and I'm going to refer to them as being the same as in Texas. But just remember, when I say south in referring to an Australian building, that's really their north side, which behaves like our south side. Confusing enough? Anyway, I think that'll make it easier. So this is in Sydney, in Australia. On the left is Vaucluse House. These are 19th century buildings in Australia. Australia was colonized by the British. They would have come in and they would have brought with them their architecture from England. So this is a Tudor house, the little crenellated castle-like top, those little towers, all those are Tudor architectural motifs. But if you just take a Tudor house, which is meant for a northern climate, and you take it and put it in a hot southern climate, then you end up frying inside this house. So you see that immediately they start putting on a veranda or a porch, which is giving solar shading, and they're putting their big windows down here, and that's already modifying their traditional architecture in England to have it respond to the climate of Australia. Almost essential, just would have been very difficult to live in British buildings in a climate that's so different from what the climate was where those buildings were developed. This is Victoria Barracks, another building from the 19th century in Sydney. And I'm taking this picture on a winter day so that this, and about noon, so you can see that there is horizontal solar shading. This is long faces north and south, very short faces east and west. On this long south facade, there's horizontal solar shading. You can see the sun is tracking in at about 35 degrees here, and it's putting sun in the windows right there, heating up the porch and heating up those rooms with the windows. Same thing happening on the lower floor right here. Classic, perfect performance. But the British would have originally made a barracks that would not have had all that on the outside, probably would have had a corridor down the center. But here, these porches and the solar shading, very, very essential for making good thermal performance of the building. So Victoria Barracks is just classic good design, long faces north and south, all the fenestration on the north and south faces, and then this horizontal solar shading on the south, meaning that the winter sun can penetrate. But in the summer, when the sun is high in the sky, it of course casts a shadow all through that porch, makes a kind of cooler area on the porch, but no heat gain in the building itself. So this is a really amazing office building in Belconnen, which is just outside Canberra. Canberra is the capital of Australia. And this is an Australian national government office building in Belconnen. Almost perfect thermally. The design of the building is very much shaped by the sun and the climate. So let's see how that's done. The building is made up of all these wings like that, long, thin wings of offices. And they've got long faces north and south, short faces east and west. And as you can see, all the fenestration is on the north. This is on the south face here, on the north face there, and pretty much no fenestration on the west face there. That's where the fire stair is, and it's completely blank. So classic, good design. We can also see that there's horizontal solar shading on the south face and no horizontal solar shading on the north face. Of course, the north face basically doesn't need shading at all. So here we see the south face with its horizontal solar shading, and you can see it casting all that shadow in there. And then this is the north face with no horizontal solar shading, just big sheets of glass. And there, of course, they just want the light, and they don't need to control the heat because there's not much sun in the northern part of the sky. Then between those wings, there are little courtyards. The little courtyards have sunshades that block that west sun and keep it nice and shadowy in the bottom down here. Here you're seeing that light coming in to the south face of the building and the horizontal solar shades controlling that light. The north side of the building doesn't get the sun. Those horizontal west facing baffles keep shade in the courtyard. The courtyard also has water and fountains in it, so there's evaporative cooling that occurs there. That splashes out at the end down here. That creates a kind of microclimate in that area right there. And on a hot summer day, whereas it might be 105 degrees out here, in that little sheltered, shaded courtyard, it might be more like 90 degrees. So now when you're air conditioning in this building, instead of air conditioning to 72 degrees against 105 degrees, which is a huge load, instead you're air conditioning 72 degrees against maybe 90 degrees in this cooler microclimate of the courtyard. This is huge energy savings. This is massive, good energy design. And now the building is really helping you to manage with the sun, understanding the cycles of the sun, understanding how to control the sun. It's now making the building able to warm itself a little bit in the winter, which you want, and absolutely keep that sun out in the summertime. Having lots of windows, but having them in right places and appropriately shaded. Now, the same kinds of things have happened in Texas. This is in Galveston. This is the Ball House. Again, people came into Texas, no matter where they came from, and immediately realized it's hotter than hell here. I've got to put a porch on the south side of that house or I'm going to fry. So here we have essentially horizontal solar shading that's happening on the south side of the house. This one is on a street where everybody's got a porch like that. And in Lisa Hishong's book, Thermal Delight in Architecture, she talks about how you make that solar shading, you then make a habitable porch out of it, so you stay out here in the shade, catching the breeze in the summertime. While you're out here, your neighbor is also out on their porch. You get a kind of sociability that goes with that. Maybe somebody's walking by on the sidewalk. You have a conversation back and forth there. The thermal device ends up being a social device as well and creates a kind of sense of place and delight that happens on a residential street there in Galveston. Here's a couple of houses in Austin doing the same thing. Downtown, we have what's called the Bremond Block. It's several houses that were owned by the Bremond family. They're now historic homes, and they're a beautiful kind of oasis of older buildings in the middle of downtown. They're between, I guess, about 7th and 8th Street, and between Guadalupe and San Antonio. Big oak trees. This is the Eugene Bremond house. It was from the middle of the 19th century. And you can see that porch all across the south face. Huge windows here that are giving them lots of light and lots of ventilation. I've taken these pictures in the wintertime, and you can see that low sun penetrating in to give a little warmth to those windows. But in the summertime, of course, when the sun is high in the sky on the south side, they're completely protected. At the other corner of the block is the John Bremond house. Again, these deep solar shades on the south side of the building there. And that actually wraps around to the east side as well. In this case, they're trying to make a habitable porch on two sides. The prevailing breeze in Austin is from the southeast, so that cooler breeze is coming in through here. and it's creating, again, this kind of microclimate, this shady area next to the building that keeps it cooler right outside the walls of the building. The way this would work is the breeze would come over the Colorado River, be cooled by the river, come up the hill here, be cooled by this shady porch, go in these huge windows right here and cool the house. And then as the heat of the house, the inhabitants' bodies, the cooking, those kinds of things, as that heated up the air, it would rise, and then there's a stairwell in the center of the house and an exhaust out the top that would draw that warm air out and pull more cool air in and get a continuous breeze in the summertime. So again, it's taking all those principles and helping the house heat and cool itself appropriately. Now again, in Texas also, we have 20th century buildings that have addressed this. This is the Tenneco building in Houston, done in 1963. Not quite as good, I think, as that building in Belconnen in Australia, but it certainly shows the architecture of the building is coming in response to climate. In this case, the glass is all set way back from the frame of the building, and all of the glass is back there in deep shadow. This building is immediately catty-corner from my firm's office in Houston. I go by this building all the time. It's really fascinating to see how well it behaves in all seasons of the year. Now, it's a tall building, so it doesn't have the ideal massing. It has fenestration on all four sides. It's pretty equal, so it doesn't have ideal fenestration. But it does have this kind of heroic solar shading. So all the glass is set way back. That means that no sun penetrates to these floor-to-ceiling glass walls. And it creates, again, this kind of microclimate around the building, a little shadier. So it's 105 degrees out here. This might be 95 degrees here, but that means you're air conditioning against 95 degrees instead of 105 degrees, which is a huge energy saving. Now, this is just trying to establish these principles of how we use the climate. We use the cycle of the sun in the winter, the cycle of the sun in the summer, these tools of massing and fenestration and solar shading to let the building use the heat from the sun when you need it for a little bit in the wintertime, and then keep out the heat of the sun when you don't want it in the summertime. These can make huge differences in your energy bills. And it also can just make a difference in comfort. That west sun pouring in a window facing west, oh my God, it's just glary and extremely uncomfortable. So there's an aesthetic side to this, there's a comfort side of this, and there certainly is an economy and practicality side to using the sun in your favor when you're making a building. Okay, see you next time.